50,000 horses, 6,000 boats, 400 carts, over 200 dogs. That was the inventory of the Mongol postal system, in China alone. Every station had a clerk logging each courier's exact arrival and departure time. Inspectors audited those logs monthly. You probably clicked expecting fresh fish delivered 500 miles inland. That specific claim doesn't appear in any primary source I could find. But what Marco Polo actually documented is different, and the real reason this network worked is not what you'd guess. The Mongol Empire at its peak stretched from Eastern Europe to the Pacific Ocean. Governing that much territory creates a problem that no army, however fearsome, can solve by itself. Communication. Orders need to reach generals, reports need to reach the Khan. Tax records, troop movements, diplomatic messages, all of it has to cross thousands of miles of steppe, mountain and desert. The solution was the Yam. That name is the Turkic word for a postal station. In Mongolian, the network is called the Ertur, meaning checkpoint. And while relay postal systems weren't a Mongol invention, earlier Chinese dynasties had run versions and the ancient Persians had their own. The Mongols did something nobody had done before. They scaled a relay network across an entire continent. In fact, most scholars now argue that the Mongols inherited both the word and the model from Chinese precedent, and then militarized it at a size no one had attempted. Who started it depends on which source you trust. Some accounts credit an empire-wide relay to Genghis Khan around the year 1200. The standard reference works say the stations as such were introduced under his son Ögedei, with one widely cited account dating that to 1234, supplied with fresh horses and fodder. What is clear is that Ögedei ordered the roads linked up across the neighboring Khanates, the territories of his brother Chagatai and his nephew Batu, so the network crossed borders inside the family. And by around 1251, according to one scholarly estimate, there were already 119 relay stations just in the northern regions. But it was under Kublai Khan that the system reached its truly staggering scale. And here we have something better than travelers' accounts, figures that come down to us from Yuan dynasty administration rather than from a tourist. By the end of Kublai's rule, China alone had more than 1,400 postal stations stocked with roughly 50,000 horses, 1,400 oxen, 6,700 mules, 400 carts, 6,000 boats, over 200 dogs, and 1,150 sheep. Stations were spaced roughly 15 to 40 miles apart. Read that inventory one more time. Boats, dogs, carts pulled by oxen. This was not a pony express. This was a multimodal logistics network. Horses across open steppe, boats along rivers and coastlines, and dog teams presumably for sledge routes in frozen terrain, though the records give us the head count, not the job description. The Mongol post office looked less like the Wild West and more like a medieval shipping company running intermodal freight. Now we get to the speed claims, and this is where we need to be careful about separating what's documented from what's legend. The most detailed eyewitness account comes from Marco Polo, who traveled through the Mongol Empire in the late 13th century and described the Yam at length. In his own words, the messengers of the emperor, traveling from Kambaluk, that's modern Beijing, found at every 25 miles a station, which they call Yamb. At those stations, Polo says, 300 or 400 horses stood ready. In more remote stretches, he adds, stations were spaced 35 or 40 miles apart instead. But Polo didn't just describe mounted couriers, he described something I think is even more fascinating: a parallel network of foot runners. Unmounted relay runners, he says, were stationed every 3 miles, and they wore broad girdles hung with bells. In Polo's telling, the bells weren't decorative. The jingling announced an incoming runner before he was visible, giving the next man in the chain time to stand, prepare, and be ready for a seamless handoff. Messages passed hand to hand, runner to runner. Polo made a specific speed claim, and it's worth noticing that he makes it about those runners. He wrote that the emperor could receive dispatches with news from places 10 days' journey away in a single day and night. News from 100 days away could arrive in 10. Later retellings, usually traced back to Polo, also have courier horsemen covering 250 or even 300 miles in a day. Though if that ever happened, it's the total distance covered by the relay, not by one rider. Each man galloped flat out for a single stretch and handed off to the next. Other secondary accounts put the daily figure much lower at around 125 miles. No independent source corroborates any of those exact numbers, so treat them as testimony, not measured fact. But even if he was exaggerating by half, the system was extraordinary. And here's the famous fresh food story, the real, documented version. According to Polo, in the fruit season, many a time fruit shall be gathered one morning in Cambaluc, and the evening of the next day it shall reach the great Khan at Chengdu. Cambaluc is Beijing, Chengdu is Chengdu, yes, that Chengdu, the summer capital that Samuel Taylor Coleridge would immortalize centuries later as Xanadu. Polo doesn't give a mileage, he describes it as a journey that would normally take 10 days. Modern estimates of the road distance put it somewhere around 200 miles, but that number is ours, not his. And gathered one morning, arriving the evening of the next day, works out to something in the region of 36 hours. Again, our arithmetic, not his stopwatch. Notice two things. First, it's fruit, not fish. Second, Polo says many a time, not every day. This was seasonal and occasional, not a daily grocery run. It was a demonstration of imperial capability. A flex, but still, fresh fruit across roughly 200 miles in a day and a half in the 13th century on a route that ordinary travelers needed 10 days to cover. That is genuinely remarkable. And it doesn't need exaggeration to be impressive. This is where the yam stops being just a fast horse story and becomes something genuinely ahead of its time. Because speed without accountability is just chaos. According to Marco Polo's account, a clerk was stationed at every post along the network. That clerk had one critical job: record the time each courier arrived and the time that courier departed. Every handoff, every delay, written down. Then Polo says, other officers made monthly visitations of all the posts and punished the runners who had been slack. He doesn't tell us what that punishment was. The stories you'll hear about executions for a late delivery aren't in his text, and I couldn't find a source that stands behind them. What he does say is that these weren't men running for their lives. The emperor exempted them from all tribute and paid them besides. Government employees with compensation, expectations, and consequences for underperformance. Now think about what that looks like operationally. If Polo is describing the system accurately, then across a network of well over 1,000 stations, you have time-stamped records of movement, a regular audit cycle, and enforcement. You have functionally parcel tracking, 7 centuries before the barcode, and a long time before anyone heard the phrase real-time visibility. And it makes sense that it would work this way. The distances were too vast and the stakes too high to rely on trust. When your empire is the largest contiguous land empire in human history, you cannot just hope your messages arrive on time. You need a system that catches failure before it compounds. The Mongols seem to have understood something that the modern logistics industry likes to claim it invented. The bottleneck is never speed, it's accountability. If you're picturing couriers carrying scrolls, you're thinking too small. The yam moved people. It moved specialists. And in at least one documented case, it moved an entire family of weapons engineers across the known world. In 1271, Kublai Khan sent envoys west to find men skilled in the management of mangonels, heavy siege engines capable of hurling massive projectiles at fortified walls. The request went to his kinsman Abaka, who ruled the Ilkhanate in Persia thousands of miles away. Abaka dispatched 2 engineers named Al-Aldin and Ismail, along with their families. The Chinese biographical record says they were sent by post route, the Yam, to Hangzhou, where they began by building large mangonels and erected them in front of the city gates. Their engines are usually credited with cracking the long siege of Xiangyang and Fancheng, which fell in 1273. The Mongol postal system shipped human expertise from one edge of Eurasia to the other, using infrastructure originally built for couriers on horseback. Envoys and members of the royal family carried an identification pass, the paisi, which is how you claimed fresh horses and rations at a station. It was, in effect, a credential system, which naturally leads to the system's biggest problem. At first, the yam wasn't locked down. Merchants and other travelers could use the postal stations. Fresh horses, food, shelter, all maintained at state expense. You can probably guess what happened next. People abused it. Heavily enough that, according to the later accounts, the privilege was eventually withdrawn from unofficial travelers. But that wasn't the worst of it. In the Ilkhanate, the abuse came from inside the system. The records from the reform period of Ghazan Khan, who ruled from 1295 to 1304, describe the number of people claiming envoy status ballooning out of control. Princes, royal sons-in-law, princesses, all dispatching envoys on personal business, and every one of those envoys was consuming horses and provisions from relay stations funded by the state. Alongside that, rampant requisitioning and corruption among local officials. Ghazan cracked down. He centralized the authorization system so that only permits issued by the central government counted. Station masters received direct orders. Do not provide horses to any envoy unless that envoy carries a royal letter bearing the Khan's own signature, his nishan, or the golden royal seal, the Altun Tamga Kasa. No valid credential, no horses, no seal, no service. The Mongol postal system had developed the exact same problem that plagues every large network eventually. Unauthorized users overwhelming shared infrastructure, and Ghazan's solution was essentially the same one modern networks use today: centralized credentials and strict access control. The YAM wasn't just a logistics marvel. It was a case study in every problem that comes with building infrastructure at continent scale. Maintenance, funding, authorization, insider fraud, and painful reform. The Mongols didn't just build the network. They had to keep rebuilding the rules around it. Here's what I find genuinely remarkable about all of this. We tend to think of the Mongol Empire in terms of conquest, the armies, the sieges, the sheer terrifying sweep of territory. But the YAM tells a completely different story. It tells us the Mongols understood something that most empires learn too late. Conquering land is the relatively easy part. Connecting it is what makes it an empire. 1,400 stations, 50,000 horses, clerks with timestamps, inspectors with authority, credentials bearing golden seals. A network that, by Marco Polo's account, could move fresh fruit a 10-day journey in a day and a half, and that demonstrably carried siege engineers and their families from Persia to China. And all of it running 600 years before anyone coined the word logistics. If you know a detail about the YAM or any ancient communication network that I missed, and I suspect some of you do, drop it in the comments. I genuinely want to know. And if this is the kind of history that changes how you see what ancient civilizations were actually capable of, subscribing means you won't miss the next one. More is coming.